The first red flag wasn't the rusted lock or the overgrown driveway. It was the woman in the leopard print blouse standing on the porch like she owned the place. I just bought a foreclosed cabin up in Pine Hollow, a quiet little mountain neighborhood where folks supposedly minded their business. The deal was clean county auction, paid in full, deed in my name. I even had the receipts printed out, tucked in my glove box. But there she was, arms crossed, blocking the front door like a guard dog. "You lost?" she asked, one eyebrow raised like she already hated me. "Nope," I said, stepping out of my truck and stretching. "Just got the keys. This place is mine now," she scoffed. "This cabin is part of our HOA. I'm the president, Tessa Brinkley, and this property's been under our care for 2 years. You can't just show up and claim it." I blinked. "I didn't just show up and claim it. I bought it, at auction, legally." She shook her head like I was a kid who just tried to explain quantum physics. "That's impossible. We've maintained this property since the foreclosure. It's under HOA jurisdiction. I even submitted paperwork to acquire it." "Yeah, well, the county didn't seem to care about that." I walked past her and unlocked the front door. She gasped like I just kicked her dog. "You're trespassing?" "No, Tessa, you are," I said, stepping inside and flipping on the dusty light switch. "Got a problem? Take it up with the county." She stormed off, muttering something about her lawyer and property theft. I figured that was the end of it. But clearly, I underestimated how deranged a power-hungry HOA president could get. The next morning, I woke up to a bright orange sticker slapped across my front window. "Stop work order, unauthorized occupancy." I was halfway through peeling it off when I heard her voice again. "Just doing my duty," Tessa called from the sidewalk, arms folded in that same hostile stance. "You're not allowed to occupy this dwelling until it's approved by the HOA," I laughed. "I don't need your approval. I own the place." She actually pulled out a clipboard, who even carries those anymore, and started reading off some nonsense about community code violations and unauthorized renovations. I hadn't touched a thing except the door lock. "You're not even legally part of this HOA," I said. "This lot wasn't under HOA jurisdiction when I bought it." "Doesn't even show up on your plat map." She turned red. "We've been working to annex it for years. It's practically ours." "Well, legally it's not," I said, "and I keep all my paperwork in the truck. You want to see the receipts?" Her face twitched, but she didn't answer, just turned and left. That night, I installed cameras, motion sensors, full perimeter. Not because I was paranoid, but because I knew people like her didn't like losing control, and I was right. The next morning, I caught her on camera walking up my porch at 5:30 a.m., trying to jam a flyer into my locked mailbox. I checked the footage twice just to make sure it was her. Leopard print again. Unmistakable. The flyer read, "Unauthorized resident alert, help us reclaim our community." That's when I knew this wasn't just about a cabin. Tessa Brinkley wanted to make an example out of me, but she had no idea who she was messing with. By Thursday afternoon, the sheriff's deputy was standing in my driveway, tapping a pen against his notepad while watching the footage I'd pulled from my security cameras. His cruiser lights weren't on, but the presence alone was enough to make the neighborhood curtain twitchers peep through their blinds. He scrubbed a hand down his jaw. "So she was on your property before sunrise, again at noon, and then at night," I nodded. 3 times in less than 24 hours. She keeps posting flyers. "Called me a squatter to 2 of my neighbors who I haven't even met yet, by the way," he grunted. "That's criminal trespass, and if she's putting things in your mailbox, that's a federal offense. Only the USPS has access to that. And she's doing it in broad daylight," I said. "She thinks she's untouchable." He flipped his notebook shut. "You want to press charges?" "Not yet," I said, "but I want a report on file. I've got a feeling this isn't close to over." He gave a slow nod, then pointed to the cameras mounted on the eaves. "Keep those rolling. If she steps on your porch again, call it in." After he left, I walked down the road to introduce myself to the 2 cabins closest to mine. The first belonged to an older couple, Hank and Dolores Banning. Hank was a retired mechanic with a stiff knee, and Dolores had the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. "She's been trying to get her hands on your place for the last year," Dolores said as she poured sweet tea into a mason jar and handed it to me. "Tessa's got this idea that the HOA should own every lot on this ridge, thinks it gives her leverage with the county," Hank chimed in. "She even tried to get the zoning board to redraw the boundaries last fall, claimed your lot was abandoned community property. They shut her down." "She tell you about the septic issue?" Dolores asked. I froze mid-sip. "What septic issue?" "She filed a complaint saying your tank was leaking," Hank said. "Which is wild because nobody's been living there for years. No water hookups, no usage, but she flagged it with the environmental board anyway." "Trying to get the property condemned," I said. Dolores nodded. "Or fined into the ground. Either way, she wants you gone." Back at the cabin, I pulled up the county building department's website and found the complaint. Filed 2 days after the auction under a name I didn't recognize, Lyle Brinkley. Her husband, apparently, same last name. I called the county office and after a 10-minute hold, got a clerk named Rita who sounded more amused than surprised. "Oh yeah, that's not the first time we've seen that name pop up," she said. "They submit a lot of complaints, but we flagged this one. There's no active septic permit on record, so it couldn't be leaking." "Can I get a copy of that complaint?" I asked. "Already emailed it," she said. "I'll also forward the rejection notice we sent them." I opened the attachment. The document clearly showed Lyle Brinkley filing as a concerned community official and requesting an immediate inspection. The rejection email from the county was short and brutal. No grounds for action. Property not under HOA jurisdiction. Do not file duplicate complaints. I printed it out and pinned it to my corkboard next to the deed and auction receipt. The next day, a landscaping crew showed up. 3 guys in green polos, unloading trimmers and rakes from a flatbed. I walked down the steps as one of them started edging along my walkway. "Can I help you?" I asked. "HOA sent us," the crew leader said. "Scheduled maintenance." "Not on my property," I said. "You step foot past that fence again, I'm calling the sheriff." He held up his hands. "Lady told us it was common grounds. We're just doing our job." I pointed at the boundary markers. "This lot is private." "You're trespassing." They packed up and left without argument, but the crew leader gave me a look on his way out like he knew this wasn't the first time they'd been misled about a job site. That night, I started digging. I pulled up Pine Hollow's HOA bylaws public records, conveniently, and found something curious. Their charter hadn't been updated since 2011. And the map showing HOA boundaries still had my lot marked as unincorporated. Even better, the footnote stated that the HOA had no legal authority over parcels outside the original Pine Hollow subdivision boundaries. I scanned the original plat map. My cabin was clearly outside the lines. And yet, Tessa had been acting like I was her tenant. The next morning, I drove into town and visited the county recorder's office. I requested copies of every public filing the HOA had made in the past 5 years. Took about 30 minutes, but the stack they handed me told a story one that smelled exactly like fraud. Among the documents was a quiet attempt to file an amended plat map last spring. The new map included my lot, but it had been rejected by the County Planning Commission. The notes in the margin were harsh. No consent from property owner, no public hearing held. Rejected under Ordinance 24.3.1. And then, something worse. Tessa had submitted a maintenance reimbursement claim to the county's Community Development Fund. Over $12,000 for restoration of abandoned HOA property. She'd listed my cabin's address. I felt my pulse in my ears. I drove straight to the sheriff's office with the documents in a folder and asked to speak to someone in investigations. Deputy Ramirez, a tall woman with a military posture, took me into a small conference room and listened as I laid it all out. The false maintenance claim, the plat map forgery attempt, the septic complaint under a fake premise. When I handed over the reimbursement form, she raised her eyebrows. This is a felony if she got paid. She did, I said, sliding over the county's disbursement ledger. Check was issued March 15th, she leaned back. You're saying she claimed HOA expenses on property they don't own, then tried to drive you off that property when it went to auction. Exactly. And you've got footage of her trespassing, mailing flyers, and misrepresenting legal authority, all documented. She stood up. We'll open a case file today. I'll be contacting the county auditor and the state's fraud division. If she used public funds under false pretenses, this goes way beyond HOA drama. By the time I got back to the cabin, yellow tape had been strung across the HOA office door at the center of the subdivision. A notice was stapled to the window, under investigation. Do not enter without clearance. Word traveled fast. That evening, Hank and Dolores dropped by with a cherry pie and 2 lawn chairs. Dolores handed me a mason jar of lemonade and nudged my elbow. You stirred up a hornet's nest, she said, eyes twinkling. But it's about time someone did. I didn't mean to, I said, just wanted a quiet place in the mountains. Hank leaned forward. You might still get it after the queen bee's gone. Early Saturday morning, I was tightening the last bolt on a new floodlight above my garage when a silver Lexus pulled up and parked at the edge of my gravel lot. The tires crunched loud against the stones and the driver's door opened slowly, like the person inside was still deciding whether this was a good idea. A man in a navy blazer stepped out. Mid-50s, expensive haircut, leather shoes that didn't belong anywhere near mountain dust. He looked around, adjusting his collar like he expected a reception committee. You the guy who bought the foreclosed property? He asked. I stood up and wiped my hands on my jeans. Depends, you with the county. No, he said, stepping forward with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm Russell Keene, legal counsel for the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association. I represent Miss Brinkley. Then you're trespassing, I replied. This is private property, and I've already got a file open with the sheriff's office. He raised both hands like he was trying to lower the temperature. I'm not here to escalate. In fact, I'd like to propose a way to resolve all this without further legal conflict. I crossed my arms. Go on. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single-page agreement. Miss Brinkley is willing to offer a settlement. The HOA will pay you $25,000 in return for a quitclaim deed. You walk away and this whole issue disappears. I stared at the paper, then back at him. You're offering to buy me out of land you claim you already own. He hesitated. We recognize that there has been confusion regarding jurisdiction. The HOA is prepared to compensate you for your time and expenses to avoid ongoing litigation. And the fraud investigation, the illegal reimbursement claims, the altered plat map, I asked. You planning to settle those too? His jaw tightened. Those matters are unrelated civil disputes, not criminal. We believe once you've accepted compensation and relinquished your claim, the county will close the case. Everyone walks away satisfied. I didn't answer. I just held out my hand for the document, pretended to read it, then turned and tossed it directly into the fire pit behind me. I'm not for sale, I said. Tell Tessa she should have thought about that before she tried to fake ownership and file for public funds. His face hardened. Then we'll see you in court. You won't, I said, because you're not going to be a lawyer much longer once the bar sees what she's dragged you into. He left without another word. An hour later, Deputy Ramirez called. Her voice was clipped but focused. We've got a confirmed wire transfer from the Community Development Fund, she said. $12,412 issued to a personal account registered under Lyle Brinkley. He listed himself as the HOA's treasurer. That's embezzlement and misuse of public funds. We're escalating the case to the district attorney's office. About time, I said. They're trying to buy me off now. I figured, she said. DA's already authorized a freeze on the HOA's operating accounts. We're also issuing a subpoena for their internal meeting notes and any correspondence related to the reimbursement claim. I hung up and walked inside, where my laptop was still open to the Pine Hollow Community Forum. Posts had been trickling in all morning, neighbors sharing stories, screenshots, even photos of Tessa attending closed-door meetings with no recorded minutes. Someone uploaded an old newsletter from last summer featuring a community improvement initiative that listed the cabin My Cabin as a future heritage site. The wording was vague, but it was enough to suggest that Tessa had been planning this stunt long before I ever showed up. That evening, I drove down to the church hall where the HOA's emergency meeting had been hastily relocated. The community center was still taped off, and the original meeting notice had been scribbled over in marker with a new location and time. By the time I arrived, the room was packed. Folding chairs filled every inch of the floor, and people were standing along the walls, murmuring in low tones. I spotted Hank and Dolores in the third row, Dolores holding a notepad like she was ready to take depositions. Tessa was already at the front, looking more frazzled than usual. Her hair was pinned back too tight, and her voice cracked as she tried to call the room to order. "Please, everyone, let's keep this civil. We're here to address the confusion and misinformation regarding the property on Ridgeview Lane." I walked straight up the center aisle and set a folder on the table beside her. "Actually," I said, "we're here to talk about how you stole public money, falsified documents, and tried to bully a legal homeowner off his land." The room went dead silent. Tessa stared at the folder like it might bite her. "These are copies of the reimbursement request you filed under your husband's name," I continued. "With a forged plat map, county already confirmed the transfer. That's felony theft." She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "I've also included the county's rejection of your annexation attempt, the septic complaint you submitted under false pretenses, and video footage of you tampering with my mailbox." Someone in the back let out a long whistle. A man near the front row stood. I recognized him from the forum, Roger Yates, a retired prosecutor who'd lived there for 15 years. "Tessa," he said, "did you really submit a reimbursement claim for a property outside our charter?" She didn't answer. Roger pushed his glasses up his nose. "Did you tell the board you'd filed it?" She still didn't speak. Another voice rose from the left side, a younger woman, probably in her 30s. "My dues went up 30% last year," she said. "You said it was for insurance coverage." "Was that a lie too?" Tessa's posture buckled slightly as murmurs spread like wildfire. I stepped back and let it all unravel. Roger turned to the crowd. "We need to suspend the current board immediately and appoint a temporary committee to audit all records. If any of this is true, and I suspect it is, we're looking at organized financial misconduct." Dolores stood, waving her notebook. "I motion that we remove Tessa Brinkley as president and freeze all HOA activity until a full audit is completed." Dozens of hands shot up in agreement. Tessa tried to speak again, but her voice was drowned out by the rising chorus of neighbors who'd had enough. By the end of the hour, a resolution had been signed by over 50 residents. The temporary committee was formed, and the sheriff's office had been notified to collect HOA records for forensic review. Tessa left through the back exit, flanked by 2 deputies. Outside, under the yellow glow of the parking lot lights, Hank clapped me on the shoulder. "You just cleaned house, son." I shook my head. "I didn't. The truth did." Dolores handed me a folded piece of paper. "From the temporary committee, they want you to help advise on the new charter. You've got a good head for details." I looked down at the invitation. "They really trust me that fast?" I asked. "You stood up when no one else would," she said. "That kind of thing sticks." As I drove back up the mountain road toward the cabin, the wind shifted through the trees and carried with it a sense of finality. The floodlight I'd installed the night before flicked on as I pulled into the drive. No more flyers, no more threats, just a cabin, finally mine, and a community waking up. The next week was quiet, but not the kind that settles in after a storm. It was the kind that feels like a town holding its breath. The HOA office stayed locked up, The temporary committee held meetings in Roger Yates' garage, and the sheriff's department maintained a subtle presence. A cruiser passed by every evening just after sunset, never stopping, just rolling slow like a reminder. I spent my time fixing the back deck. Half the boards were warped from years of neglect, and the railing had more rot than wood. As I pulled each nail free, I thought about how fast things had shifted. One minute I was the outsider, the next I was being asked about bylaws and budget caps like I'd lived here for decades. On a Thursday morning, I got a call from Deputy Ramirez. Her voice was sharper than usual, like she'd been running on coffee and adrenaline. "We got approval from the DA's office to execute a search warrant," she said. "We're hitting Tessa Brinkley's residence and a storage unit she's been renting under her maiden name. County records show she was paying for it through the HOA's general fund." "What do you think she's hiding?" I asked. "Hard to say," she replied. "But based on the financials we've pulled so far, there's a lot more money unaccounted for than just that reimbursement check. We're talking mid-five figures." I hung up and grabbed my jacket. By the time I got to the edge of the subdivision, the street was lined with unmarked vehicles. A black SUV with state plates idled in front of Tessa's house, and two deputies stood by the gate while a detective in plain clothes knocked on her door. She didn't answer. They didn't wait long. A locksmith arrived minutes later, popped the front lock with practiced ease, and the team went inside. Nothing dramatic, no shouting or arrests, just methodical movement, boxes sealed, laptops bagged, and file drawers emptied. I stayed back, watching from the gravel shoulder. After 30 minutes, Ramirez came out holding a heavy black binder. "She kept double ledgers," she told me, flipping it open. "One set for the board, the other for herself." The pages were handwritten, neat columns of numbers dating back almost 3 years. Payments listed as garden maintenance and mailbox repairs had been funneled into what looked like a personal checking account. The amounts weren't massive individually, but they added up monthly withdrawals just under reporting thresholds, always rounded off, always labeled vaguely. "Most of these expenses never happened," I said. "There were no improvements. Nothing ever changed." "That's what the invoices say too," Ramirez replied. "She created dummy vendors, all of them trace back to P.O. boxes. We're bringing in a forensic accountant to confirm, but it looks like she skimmed close to $60,000. Later that afternoon, the temporary committee called an emergency town hall. This time it was held in the old firehouse, a squat brick building at the base of the hill. Word had spread fast, and nearly every homeowner showed up, some with folding chairs, others just standing in the back with arms crossed. Roger stood at the front, holding a stack of copies. "These are public documents now," he began. "What we're looking at is systematic theft. Miss Brinkley diverted HOA funds through false vendors and fake maintenance jobs over a 3-year period. She used board approval for legitimate expenses, then inflated the amounts and pocketed the difference." Someone near the back asked how it went unnoticed. "She controlled the books," Roger explained. "And the previous board relied on summaries, not full reports. She used that trust to manipulate the numbers." Another voice asked what would happen next. "The district attorney will be filing charges," he said. "Embezzlement, wire fraud, misuse of public funds, and possibly tax evasion if she failed to report the income. She'll be prosecuted at the state level." There was a pause, then someone asked what it meant for the HOA. "We're dissolving it," Roger said. "Effective immediately. The charter will be nullified. All remaining funds will be audited and any remaining balance returned proportionally to current members." A low wave of murmurs rolled through the room. Relief, disbelief, and something else, satisfaction. "Good," said a man near the front. "We never needed it in the first place." I stayed until the end, helping fold chairs and haul boxes of old records into the back of Roger's truck. He looked over at me as we loaded the last one. "You planning to stick around?" he asked. I nodded. "I didn't come up here looking for a fight." "But I'm not leaving now." "Smart." He shut the tailgate. Place could use more people who don't scare easy. A few weeks passed. The cabin started to feel like mine in ways that had nothing to do with paperwork. I installed new gutters, stained the porch, and built a bench overlooking the ridge. Deer passed through in the mornings, and once I even caught a fox napping in the sun by the woodpile. The air smelled like pine sap and old earth. Then one morning, a letter arrived official, embossed with the state seal. It was a court summons. Tessa was being formally charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The case would be heard in the county courthouse, and I was listed as a material witness. Not just for the initial confrontation, but as the person who'd provided the documentation that opened the investigation. I showed up 3 weeks later in a pressed shirt and tie, sitting quietly near the back. The courtroom was small, the kind of place you'd expect traffic tickets and noise complaints, not white-collar crime. But the judge took it seriously. Tessa sat at the defendant's table in a gray suit, her expression blank, eyes down. Her lawyer looked tired, flipping through exhibits like someone trying to salvage a sinking ship. The prosecution laid it out plainly. The fake vendors, the falsified expenses, the reimbursement request based on a property she didn't own. They even showed the forged plat map and the county's rejection notice. When I took the stand, they asked only a few questions. I kept it simple. I explained how I'd purchased the cabin legally, how she claimed it belonged to the HOA, and how I'd uncovered the paper trail that led to everything else. Her lawyer tried to trip me up, but it didn't work. Too much had already been documented. Too many people had seen what she'd done. The trial lasted 2 days. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 5 years, with a requirement to pay full restitution. Her assets were seized, including the Lexus and her cabin, which turned out to be in her husband's name, a technicality that didn't protect it from civil forfeiture once the fraud was proven. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to. Instead, I spent the afternoon planting cedar saplings along the back edge of my lot, where the tree line had thinned over the years. As I dug, the mountain breeze carried the smell of damp soil and wildflowers. Later, Hank walked up the path with a 6-pack and a grin. "Thought you could use a cold one," he said. "Heard the verdict." I took a bottle and popped it open. "Feels like it's finally done," I said. He nodded. "You didn't just win, you set this place free." We sat on the new bench and watched the sun dip behind the ridge. No more flyers, no more fake fines, no more shadow meetings, just the mountain, the trees, and the quiet. And a cabin that finally belonged to someone who wouldn't let it be taken.